Welcome to the Proclamation 2024 Technology Applications Publisher webinar. We're so excited you're here joining us this afternoon. My name is Janet Warren. I am the Review and Adoption Coordinator for the Instructional Materials and Implementation Division. And I am going to let the rest of my team introduce themselves real quickly, and then we will move forward with our slides.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Pignato. I am a Review and Adoption Specialist. I work very closely with Janet in the Review and Adoption unit.
Hi, and my name is Deb Dorman. I am the Director of Enrichment, of which the Technology Applications subject area falls within.
Great. I want to let you know that we are recording this presentation today, and it will get posted to the TEA website. And I'll also send a follow-up email within the next couple days with a link to the recording and the slide deck so that you'll have that available. And we do have quite a few slides to get through today. So as we're going through, I'd like you to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer questions as we can. And if we need to hold some of them till the end, we'll do that as well. All right, so today we will provide technology application specific information to help inform your decision to participate in the Texas adoption. Deb will start off by talking about the technology application standards, and then I'll go over the next steps, including the first deliverables that are due. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Deb share hers. And we will be putting some links in the chat. If there's links on our slides, those will be getting added to the chat so that you can grab those. We'll also be sharing those in that follow-up email as well.
Okay, can you all see my screen yet?
Not yet.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, let me get it in slideshow mode. All right, let's begin. As Janet said, there are quite a few slides that I'm going to share with you. Today, I'm going to give you some of the basics, a primer on the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, walk through the Teks review and revision process, which the technology applications underwent to get to this stage, review what the Teks are and what breakouts look like, and then get into a little bit more depth about the actual details behind the technology applications. So what are the Teks? You'll frequently hear the word Teks or Teks. They are the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills that are the state standards. They identify both what the student should know and what they should be able to do at the end of the course or grade level. This is what all state panels are required to evaluate against when they're looking at instructional materials to determine if they should be adopted or not. So very important to understand and apply them. So if you want to find the Teks for technology applications, you can find them. For those of you who are familiar with the process and location, you can go to the Texas Secretary of State website, but I've also provided direct links and a QR code here for you to get there a little more quickly. That's useful to you. You do not need to go to those today because I'll be sharing a lot of screenshots from that site. So you can certainly apply these afterwards. If you wish to go there now, you certainly can. One thing I do want to point out when you do get to the location of the Teks is that there are two sets of Teks in there. The currently implemented Teks for 2012, 2013, and you'll see in the screenshot below that the year is listed at the end of each of them. So you'll see the currently implemented ones that are marked 2012, 2013, and the ones that say adopted 2022. It is the adopted 2022 TEKS that are in this proclamation. Let's talk about the Teks review process. This is a process that is owned by the State Board of Education, and along with the direct participation of educators, parents, business, many people, they get together to basically review and revise the existing TEKS. The process takes 1 to 2 years from start to finish. The last time the technology applications were reviewed and were adopted in 1998, with another review that happened in 2010. And those 2010 adopted TEKS are what I just pointed out that exist in the Secretary of State Texas Administrative Code now, the 2012-2013 version. The recent review process was completed in June at the State Board of Education meeting, and these newly adopted TEKS will be implemented in the 24-25 school year. Certain things to know: the State Board of Education may not adopt rules that designate the methodology used by a teacher to teach the TEKS, and they may not adopt rules that designate the amount of time it takes for a teacher or student on a particular task or subject related to those TEKS. That is all up to the teachers to decide how to do that. There is another state law that comes into play here that states that the college and career readiness standards are to be integrated into the TEKS that are adopted by the State Board of Education. And you'll see that that's one of the resources that the review committees used when revising for technology applications. I won't go through all of these steps, but know that there are many steps between starting the revision process, working right down through the rulemaking and approval process down at the bottom. A lot of what you see today will be the outcomes of many work groups that worked on the revision process in the direction that the State Board gave back to them after all of their reviews, and then finally the version that we will be discussing today. So when you start analyzing the standards, there are things that you're going to see that come up. First, there are going to be 3 major parts: the implementation information section, the introduction, and the actual standards. The standards being the key critical part that you're going to want to pay attention to when creating your materials. The actual standards themselves are made up of knowledge and skill statements and student expectations. In the implementation section, you're going to find information about what school year that the TEKS will be implemented and what year materials may be implemented as well if there's funding available. You'll see those statements as well. And as a reminder, the implementation year for technology applications is 24-25. The introduction section contains more specific content information about the course. In the technology applications introduction, you're going to see that the technology description is applied to technical and learning settings. You're going to see the listing of 5 strands for which the TEKS align with, and a description of what those 5 strands mean in the context of technology applications. The statement that the technology applications content can exist as a standalone course or be integrated into other existing courses. Statements about extending learning experiences for students, and the differentiation between including and such as statements, which we'll go into a little bit more detail soon. Now, the meat of the content are the knowledge and skill statements and the student expectations. Starting with the knowledge and skill statements. They're very broad statements. They can be organized into strands or substrands, but they always end with the student is expected to. You will notice in all of the technology application TEKS that they begin with a strand. Here is one example. Creativity and innovation is a strand. And then it's followed by information about what students generally be learning in this student particular knowledge and skill statement. And it ends with a statement, the student is expected to. All of the Teks in knowledge and skill statements will have a strand. In many cases, a knowledge and skill statement could have a strand and a substrand. In technology applications, you will find both a strand followed by a dash and a set of additional information. This is the substrand. So you have the overarching category, in this case is digital citizenship, and the substrand of being social interactions. And when you start looking at the student expectations, you'll see that the knowledge and skills are definitely related to digital citizenship, but at the social interaction level. Again, this will make a little more sense as we delve down into the Teks a little bit more. Student expectations, they're directly related to the knowledge and skill statement, specific on how students will demonstrate that knowledge or demonstrate the behavior, always begins with an observable verb and is preceded by the student is expected to, because that is part of the knowledge and skill statement. Important key words that will show up in the Teks and to pay attention to, the words and words, anything around an and must be included. We'll go into this in a little more detail later as well. If you see the word among, you include all of the words that follow the word among. If you have something like, I will choose an apple or a pear, it's one or the other, but not necessarily both. Anything that's follow, including, like for instance, I'm going to pick fruit, including apples and pears and peaches, then you would include apples, pears, and peaches. And if you see the words such as, those are listed as examples for instructional use. They do not need to be included in the student behaviors. Let's look at this a little more closely. Here's an example from the newly adopted Technology Applications Teks. As you look at it, we've had a conversation about strands and substrands. Can you identify the strand and the substrand? Can you identify the knowledge and skill statement? Give you a few seconds to look at this. Okay, here come the answers. This is the knowledge and skill statement. Starts with information, but it ends with the student is expected to. This information up here also had labels that we discussed. The first part is the strand. The second part is the substrand. So we know that the student expectations are going to be about data literacy, management, and representation, but around the substrand of collecting data. So as we look at these substrands, you will see, as you read them more closely, it is about collected information about people, events, and objects, about ideas that digital devices can search for and retrieve information, all related to the substrand of collecting data. And as you can see, there are actually two student expectations here. Breakouts. All student expectations can be, the content can be broken out into what we call breakouts. These breakouts are used to determine the coverage of an SE in instructional materials, SE standing for student expectation. So let's look at one. Our knowledge and skill examples. Practical technology concepts is our strand. Our substrand is skills and tools. What the student will overarchingly do as a result of this in this knowledge and skills area, well, they'll demonstrate knowledge and appropriate use of technology systems, concepts, and operations. The student is expected to. Then we have an SE. Oops. In the SE, it says use a variety of applications, devices, and online learning environments to engage the content. This SE can actually be broken out into 3 areas. We'll go into the rules of how that happens in a second. So from an instructional coverage point of view, all 3 of these areas would need to be covered to make sure that the student mastered the student expectation. They would have to use a variety of applications to engage with content. They would have to use a variety of devices to engage with content, and they would have to use a variety of online learning environments to engage with content. Let's look at the breakouts in a little more depth. As you notice in that prior example, breakout list can be joined by and. If a student expectation uses the word and, you would break them out to cover both of sections of the and. Let's look at this again. Here's a student expectation. Use a variety of application devices, comma, and online learning environments. So breakouts, use a variety of applications, which is the first part of the SE. Use a variety of devices, which is the second element right before the and statement. And then use the online learning environments to engage with content. All 3 because of the word and. You also see, and you will notice in the technology applications, there are quite a few ands. There also is an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to use the word or. Here's an example of an or student expectation found in technology applications. The student is expected to combine various file formats for a specific project or audience. In this case, there would only be one single breakout because of the word or. So it would stay the same. The student could do one or the other. There is no requirement that they do both. Then there's the word including. You will notice that there are a lot of including statements in the technology applications Teks. Here's one example. This knowledge and skill statement is related to practical technology concepts with the substrand of processes. The SE, student expectation, says the student is expected to share and seek feedback on files and formats. Notice the word and here. We've already had a rule about and. Here's the word including text, raster, and vector graphics, video, and audio files. I'm going to give you a few minutes to just absorb that. You know the rules for and. You've just heard that you break out everything as well for the statement including. What do you think the breakouts might look like? I'll give you 30 seconds to kind of think through that before I give you the answer. Okay, let's start looking at what the breakouts would look like for this one. Here are the first 3. There's the share and the seek. So we need to start with the word share. Students should be expected to share feedback on files in various formats, which is the part right before the comma, including You see over here in blue, including text files. That's the first one. Then you would continue, share feedback on files in various formats, including raster and vector graphic files. But wait, Deb, you just told me I had to break out the ands and do them separately. Here's the trick to the and statements. Notice the commas here. It says text, comma, raster and vector graphics. So after the including, because raster and vector graphics are included within the same phrase, they would be combined. So in this case, share feedback on files in various formats, including raster and vector graphic files. So they would be contained together in this particular breakout. Next breakout for number 3 would be share feedback on files in various formats, including video files. Breakout number 4 would be to share feedback on files in various formats, including audio files. We have just finished the share portion of the breakouts. Then we need to go through and do the same thing with the word seek. Seek feedback. Seek feedback on files in various formats, including text files. Seek feedback on files in various formats, including raster and graphic files, again, because they are grouped together because of the comma. Seek feedback on files in various formats, including video files, and seek feedback on files, including various formats, including audio files. So this student expectation B has 8 different breakouts associated with it because of the word and because of the word including. They can be quite complex. Such as, if you remember from before, such as, there for examples. You do not need to include all of those in instructional format. These are examples of what something might look like. In this case, the student is expected to identify effective file management strategies, such as file naming conventions, local and remote locations, etc. The breakout is only identify effective file management strategies. Does not need to include the following list here, because those are examples of what that might look like for the student, such as. All right, that's a very fast primer on breakouts and TEKS. Now let's talk about the TEKS development and design process. What happened to get to this phase? There were a lot of work groups that were assembled by the State Board of Education, and as I mentioned before, made up of educators, people in industry, lots of representatives. They were given a lot of work group resources, including the prior TEKS, to use in their evaluation and to achieve the task that was given to them by the State Board of Education. This is a list of some of the resources that were given to them. The global and national standards, the International Society for Technology and Education Standards for students for the 2016 version. You may be more familiar with these as ISTE standards. Also, they were given the Computer Science Teachers Association K-12 standards from 2017. There were other state standards that were given to them. These were states that had more recently adopted and updated their technology application standards. They were also given the CTE TEKS for the computer science courses and things that the technology apps would actually move into. As you may recall, for those of you who might remember back in 2020, the State Board of Education actually moved a lot of the high school, well, not a lot of, all of the high school technology application standards into the high school computer courses. So the technology applications in 2022 are only for grade levels K through 8. So it was important to see what those TEKS look like in the CTE space. So when grade 8 moved and transitioned into those high school courses, they connected smoothly.
Hey, Deb, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. But before you move on, there was one quick question about those breakouts, and I was hoping maybe you could answer that before we move on and lose it in the.
Oh, I can try. If I think it'll be a long answer, I'll say we'll get back to you.
Okay. So in the graphic example, would materials have to cover raster and vector graphics both to meet that breakout? Or would it meet if only one of those was included?
Both of those would need to be included.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, going back to the resources that the work groups had, they were also given 2 state laws, and those laws are listed here. The first one essentially says the technology applications update needed to include coding, computer program, computational thinking, and cybersecurity. And it also had a required cadence in which the technology apps TEKS would need to be updated in the future. The second one talks about the incorporation of digital citizenship into district's curriculum, including the consequences of cyberbullying. So both of those were available to work groups to consider and include in the TEKS revision. And then, of course, as required by law, the Texas College and Career Readiness Standards were also available, and work groups included those as appropriate into the standards. If you're interested in reading the final work group recommendations throughout each of the work groups and read through the process of an evolution of the standards throughout all of those work group definitions, I provided a link here and a QR code for you to go to the webpage. And the webpage here is on the right, what you should see when you get to the right location. If you were to click on the recommendations, it says Work Group E Draft Recommendations. You would see something like this. There are a lot of pages because there are a lot of, as you know, a lot of TEKS and strands and substrands, but you will see the progress of the kindergarten through grade 8. You can see what wording changes had been made by work group E as they went through. The word new kind of represents it's a new TEK in a new place. And then you can also read the rationale as to what the work group was considering in addressing changes or what they actually used or did to create those particular standards. So if you choose to go there, that's what you will find. Overarching changes in these technology applications. I'm hoping there are a lot of people here who are familiar with the old ones, so you can appreciate the significance of these changes. The very first one is a very significant change. The prior standards were all grouped together in a grade band. So K through 2, one set of TEKS for grades K through T. Same with grade band 3 through 5, 6 through 8. You will notice the change that they are now TEKS at each grade level. Significant change in the 22-22 adopted format. So there are TEKS for kindergarten, there are TEKS for first, et cetera, et cetera. It can no longer be an option for schools to teach it somewhere in kindergarten, first or second. There are TEKS for each specific grade level. As you saw from earlier examples, there's the use of strands and substrands to help organize the student expectations and the content that must be presented. There's a reorganization of the content across strands. And I say reorganization because the very first work group took all of the existing TEKS and they put them into the strands and said, where is a good home for these now? The strands, there are 2 new strands, computational thinking, as you saw, that was a requirement by law. There's also a new strand called data literacy, management, and representation. Brand new, not in the prior TEKS. Creativity and innovation remains a strand from the past. Digital citizenship remains a strand from the past. And practical technology concepts remains a strand from the past. You will find that there were a lot of new TEKS that were created to align with the new strands, as well as the grade level structure. So if there's an existing strand from the past, there are new TEKS that needed to be created because it's no longer a grade band, but at each grade. You will see that there's no longer a communications and collaboration strand from the prior current version of the TEKS. That is because the work groups felt that communications and collaboration should be woven throughout. It was no longer a need to have an isolated set of activities for those, but those should be interwoven where possible through all of the 5 strands that you see today. There was a discussion that a lot of the words and language like algorithms and computational thinking could bring a lot of fear and trepidation to a lot of teachers out there. But there was just a gentle kind of reminder in the way the TEKS were written for people not to assume that this is a coding class, but everything that can be done with technology applications can be done easily by discussing everyday life and solving problems that students face day to day. So there was a big effort to tie everything to what students do, like making sandwiches and things like that. So there's nothing that can be scary about that for students or for the teachers, although the TEKS are written for students. You will see that there's a progression of language for what students are familiar with, like the word day-to-day procedures, to eventually the word algorithm. You will see the use of the words with assistance throughout, especially in the early grades of the TEKS, where there was evidence that students should be able to do something. They may not be able to do it independently, but they should be able to do it with assistance. You will also see some of the TEKS specify whether or not technology should be used, because there are many concepts that can be taught without technology. And so they're giving the option for students who have access to the technology to say, do this with technology, or students, you do not have to do this without technology. You will also see the use of parentheses in the TEKS language where something might be explained and put into simpler terms, or they're like algorithm, day-to-day procedures is an example of that. And you're also going to see a lot of broad descriptions on technology. There was a conversation by all that there is a big technology disruption going on right now, and nobody wanted to limit the type of technology that could be discussed throughout the life cycle of these TEKS. So you're going to see that there's a broader use of technology to allow for anything that might be current or emerging to come into the conversation. Any questions today, Cassie, before I get started with kindergarten?
Oops, I muted myself 3 times. Excuse me. There is a question. Are the new middle school standards for CTE included in the TA TEKS? So CTE teacher can cover both standards at the same time.
These are technology applications standards only, not, there is no connection to the CTE high school courses.
Thank you.
There is a conscious flow, as I mentioned before, between 6, 7, 8 to the 9th grade CTE course, so that they build upon each other. But they would be hard to teach them at the same time. But again, State Board of Education does not give instructional advice. They just provide what the students are expected to do or see. Kindergarten. So as you will see here, computational thinking starts at kindergarten. And the way that this is introduced is through problem or task identification, patterns that are around them, step-by-step procedures like building a sandwich is the example that comes in kindergarten. What is the algorithm? What's the step-by-step process for building a sandwich? Decomposition, breaking a sandwich into smaller pieces. Predictions from the data, creating code sequences, again, not using programming languages, but up, down, right, and left, which teachers acknowledge the students are learning anyway. So getting people familiar with how to use some of the terms as they are learning them into code sequences is a good connection activity. Creativity and innovation. A lot of personal skill development you'll see throughout the strands for under creativity and innovation, developing personal skills needed for the design process. There's a huge, huge emphasis on design process throughout the Teks this time that you will not have seen as much of in the past. There's a huge emphasis, as you will see here, in the application of a design process to solve problems. You will see problem solving throughout the grade levels and throughout the different strands in the Teks. Data literacy also starts in kindergarten, just on focusing generally what data is. And the concept of searching and retrieving information is also introduced at the kindergarten level. Again, at the kindergarten level terms, but still it is tied back to data. Digital citizenship focuses on good behaviors as a citizenship, following local acceptance use policies, knowing that content is owned by somebody, what's acceptable use of the content, and of course, internet safety and digital citizenship safety is taught K through 8 all the way through. The technology, practical technology concepts, beginning to use hardware and devices. Tying back learning the letters in the alphabet to finding letters on the keyboard, the identification of hardware components, and of course the proper use of using the devices from an ergonomic point of view is also introduced. Just to reiterate what I said earlier, you're going to see a lot of with assistance or with or without technology, especially at kindergarten level. So we move into first grade, you're going to see there's a lot of scaffolding from kindergarten, still identifying problems. Decomposition has moved into a sequence type of decomposition, identifying patterns from everyday tasks, basic algorithms again, from terms that first graders understand, up, down, right, left. And this is where they start applying it to a problem. How would you get something out the door? How would you get something out a window? Creativity and innovation. Again, the design process is back, why it's used in problem solving, and then tying technology to communities around them. Data literacy, again, keyword searches, digital sources. So it might be, use this keyword. How would you find all videos in this particular area? And then of course, there's the beginning aspect of data collection. Again, data collection from the everyday life around a first grader. Digital citizenship, again, focuses on acceptable use, developing appropriate good citizenship behaviors, more safety concepts, why you don't share passwords, for example, and the concept of cyberbullying is introduced and given a label at that grade. Practical technology and concepts, again, still building on usage. There was a big push in this area throughout all of the grade levels, even though the student expectations are very closely related, that there was a continued need to continue using over and over some of these practical technology concepts to make sure the skills were very well ingrained over the years. Still identifying hardware pieces and application things, building and expanding on keyboarding skills. But this is the first time that they start creating original products using technology and getting the concept of revising their products. Second grade, computational thinking, again, builds upon earlier grade levels. Decomposition now goes into multiple solutions with sequential steps. There's an introduction of complex patterns. There's the creation of if-then statements in both creating things and in troubleshooting. And then variables and loops are introduced. Creativity and innovation, again, the using of a design process to create solutions and to solve problems. Data literacy ties to non-numerical data collection. The data literacy work streams were frequently visiting with both the math and the science Teks to make sure that they were not introducing anything in advance of those particular subject areas, and in some case chose to wait to introduce a concept a year after a concept was introduced based upon how easy or not easy it was for a student to understand a particular concept. So when it came to non-numerical data collection, there was a belief that they would align this with the other subject areas because they felt it would be compatible and it would strengthen the knowledge across all of the related topics that use non-numerical data collection. Again, keyword searches, use of bar graphs, visualizations come into play here. And notice it says such as, it's an example of what a data visualization in second grade might be. Digital citizenship, more use on more acceptable use, content ownership and safety, but it for the first time introduces what is private information and what is public information and why you might want to keep one safe over the other. Practical technology concepts built on everything to date, but introduces the concept of sharing content with others. Moving on to third grade. Computational thinking builds on story problems from other subject areas. Oh, interesting adds word here. Focuses on debugging. A little bit more than in the past grades. The use of variables to store data. And there's the connection with the data literacy point there with variables to store data. There's the breaking down of a problem into subproblems. Procedures, building procedures instead of step-by-step activities. And then from a coding perspective, there's building on of loops, but for the first time, it's adding the conditional statements. Creativity and innovation, more development of personal skills. And it has a lot of such as for what those skills could look like. But it's beginning to add definitions of things like emerging technology, what that means as a third grader. Data literacy that moved from, shifted from non-numerical to numerical data collection in third grade. Because searches have been done up until this point, they're now beginning to introduce what search strategies are and how they can be used to collect data. And the use of digital tools to communicate and publish results. You will notice at third grade that a lot of the work products and skills that are to be mastered have an intent with them, if it's to inform or to persuade, and then to a specified audience. So there's the beginning of teaching that you don't just put content out there, but it's for a reason, and it's usually to or for someone. In third grade, in digital citizenship, the concept of digital footprint, digital etiquette, and digital collaboration comes into play here. Copyright law is now the terminology beginning to be used, the use of citations, definitely more account safety awareness and awareness of online dangers. And in terms of cyberbullying, again, it grows on what that is, but also what responses to cyberbullying could look like. For practical technology concepts, application types, terminology is introduced a little bit more, file naming conventions are introduced, keyboarding and input devices are used here. There's an acknowledgement that, keyboards are not always the only input device used by third grade. So there's skills related to keyboards, input devices, and shortcuts in all of those. And then there's a little bit of problem solving when it comes to technical issues that are introduced into third grade. Computer doesn't turn on. Why might that be? Type of thought process comes into play. Cassie, any questions before I move on to fourth grade?
I do not see any.
Okay, because I know I'm zipping through here quickly to make sure we have time here at the end. Fourth grade, computational thinking. We've already had subproblems introduced in third grade. Now we focus on solutions to those problems. More about patterns and predicting patterns. There's more debugging going on. Variables are used to modify data. And we've already discussed sequences, loops, and conditionals in the past, but now the intent is to use them with a purpose. Creativity and innovation, again, that design process, again, the use of the design process to improve processes and products. So it's building on the design process with a purpose. Data literacy, we've already had non-numerical data, we've had numerical data. Now it's the focusing on both of them combined. Transformation of data comes into play here. Making inferences about a data to answer a question comes into play. Using digital tools to communicate inquiry results. As I mentioned before, using tools for a reason, for an audience to do something. It was under practical concepts before, it's under data literacy for this particular idea. Digital citizenship, I can't even say it right now. Digital citizenship. More about citations, copyright laws and creative works, types of data collection tools used, and under cyberbullying, there was in third grade, there was some responses to it, but here, the introduction of advocacy, advocating for yourself and for others in a cyberbullying scenario. Practical technology concepts, again, building on everything learned to date. File naming conventions in terms of strategies used to file things and folder structures, and more on strategies to solve technical issues, either hardware or software related. Fifth grade. Computational thinking. Graphical organizers come into play when it comes to decomposition in fifth grade. The idea of creating documents to address problems, solutions, and code resolution timelines. So coming up with a plan, identifying what the problem is, what the possible solutions, what might it take to solve that in a timeline. Comparing and selecting algorithms for a certain task, designing process to create block-based programs. This is a new concept in fifth grade. And then the reuse of code to create code that can be only used a single time, or can code be reused. Creativity and innovation. Again, using the design process to generate multiple solutions, and the thought of predicting how emerging technologies can impact communities is introduced. Data literacy talks about quantitative and qualitative data, new terms. Keywords are revisited, Boolean operations are new, and limiters are new. Transformation has been done in the past, but now data is analyzed, transformed, and inferences are made about the data to answer specific questions. And then there's a communication part of data literacy, and using a visual display to inform an intended audience. Digital citizenship, the concept of digital imprints that are left behind when you are involved in activities is introduced. Digital etiquette for different audiences, meaning that how you have digital etiquette for the principal in your school might be different or the same to the digital etiquette that you would have with a friend that you're chatting with. Copyright law in terms of its purpose and the consequences of violating it. Cybersecurity strategies for safety and security. And then the types of how an everyday interaction can escalate and turn into cyberbullying, and also ways to stand up to cyberbullying. Practical technology concepts, still more on file types, more functions and more terminology related to applications. Actually some evaluation of multiple systems and knowing which one to select for certain types. Keyboarding is continued in terms of fluency. How fluid are people at using these skills? Have they gained more speed, etc.? And the use of help to research problems when things happen on applications and in hardware. Moving on to 6th grade, computational thinking. Visual representations are introduced in terms of decomposition and analyzing patterns. Abstractions are used, as well as generalized information and specific information in the process of computational thinking. Again, there's documentation that's created that use visual representations, and debugging techniques are explored in more detail and through the use of iterations from a debugging concept. Creativity and innovation, more on this design process that I keep pointing out to you. Connecting design processes to industry. There's a focus on technology throughout history and how that impacts areas of study, and then global trends on the technology. Data literacy in 6th grade, how data can be represented as a Boolean expression. Terminology has been used in 5th grade, but now it's actually representing it as a Boolean expression. Using tools to transform data with the intent of discussing trends and making inferences. And then, of course, the communication and display of data for a purpose and to a specific audience. Digital citizenship, the impact of a digital footprint that is left behind. We've learned about what they are from the last grade, 5th grade, but now what happens if you do something that sticks around for a while? The impact of digital footprints. Using appropriate etiquette in your communications and presentations. Protection and consequences of the benefits of intellectual property law. Creating more citations, citing digital sources. Protection against cybersecurity attacks, and various methods of cyberbullying. Practical technology concepts in 6th grade. Keep building on the top of each other. Advanced file management, more terminology, the terminology more focused on application by 6th grade. The technology applications, I should say. The student being able to use and select tools for specific tasks, the use of local and remote storage, meaning the cloud, use of productivity tools to create artifacts, specific artifacts, and then keyboarding skills with word per minutes listed as what the intent is here, and more on troubleshooting. 7th grade, computational thinking introduces the concept of flowcharts and analyzing patterns in flowcharts. There has been an abstraction in the past, the generalized and specific data. There's evolution and into the concept of abstraction and how algorithms can be generalized at this point. The documentation on solving problems is now to include flowcharts. Applications of various debugging techniques and the benefits of iterations are introduced. There's more work with more variables and more data types. And there's the introduction of nested loops. In the creativity and innovation strand, trial and error and the use of prototypes are introduced. The design process is connected to industry. There's still more discussion about technology throughout history. And also there's still more on the global trends of impact on technology. Data literacy, use of binary number systems is introduced in 7th grade. Tools to transform data to analyze trends and make inferences is built on from 6th grade, but making predictions is added now in 7th grade. Communicate and display of data. Now, in the past, it's been mostly to inform, but now it's to inform or persuade, and then to a specific audience. Digital citizenship, digital footprints expand to the actions and effects of digital footprints. Creation and the revision techniques for communications are introduced, coming from feedback sources. Intellectual property and terminology is built upon. There is a focus on how information can be exaggerated and misrepresented in digital environments. There's a discussion on what some of the real world cybersecurity issues are, and then what the negative impacts of cyberbullying are addressed as well. Practical technology concepts. A lot more focus on the creation of digital artifacts here, appropriate use of terminology in terms of hardware and applications, file management strategies, using the correct tool to do the right task, more focus on storage types and how to store and share data, more on keyboarding, and more on resolving technical issues. But the new part that's introduced here are the testing of solutions to solve the technical issue. 8th grade, last grade. Computational thinking, the use of pseudocode and decomposition, as well as in analyzing patterns. Abstraction, using developed generalized as opposed to specific algorithms. Creating a plan that uses pseudocode. Improving and modifying previously written algorithms come into play here, and using named variables, which is a new concept in 8th grade. Under creativity and innovation, it's a lot of building on from grade 7, more on the design process with focus on innovation. There's more connections to industry. There's more technology throughout history, and there's more of an impact of trends on technology with the ability to evaluate and predict what might happen in those areas. Data literacy, multiple data types are used at this stage. Applying search strategies that have been discussed throughout all of the grades for a specific outcome. Transforming data, analyzing trends, inferences, predictions, and developing steps to create a process. All of that comes together in 8th grade to use all of that information to create a process or a product. And then the communicate and publish data. The word publish, kind of one of the first times to publish with the intent to persuade an attended audience. So persuasion is the key point here. Publishing is key point, and to a specific audience. Digital citizenship, managing digital footprints, creating and publishing communications for a global audience using appropriate etiquette, evaluating bias in a digital environment, analyzing real-world cybersecurity issues and proposing ways to prevent harm, evaluating case studies to identify warning signs of a cyberbullying victim and predict the outcomes for the victim and the bully. Again, kind of a buildup throughout the years into this grade level 8 skill and level of knowledge. Practical technology concepts, combining file formats, sharing and seeking feedback on files that have been created, using more terminology, using more effective file management strategy, transferring data, using the appropriate type of storage, using the right productivity tools to create the right form of digital artifact. And the focus has been on words per minutes on keyboarding, but it's now with a focus on the improvement of those words per minutes and speed. And then, of course, there's the use of tools to create artifacts that are more complex than have been created in the past. I think that's it. Yeah. Before we close, Cassie, are there any questions?
I don't see any.
Okay, and I feel like I've been racing through all of this from the time perspective. So what we've discussed to date are what is a TEKS, where to find them for technology applications, what the review process was to review the prior TEKS and to come with the adopted TEKS that are in front of you for materials development, review of the TEKS and the breakouts, and the highlights of the K through 8, very, very fast highlights of what those were and how they scaffold between the grade levels. I know we have some time for questions now, but you are also welcome to put all of the questions you might have in the instructional materials help desk. The link is here, and I'm sure you all know how to do that already. But as a reminder, if we don't answer your questions today and you think of something after this meeting, you are certainly welcome to put them in the instructional materials help desk, and Janet and Cassie will get anything to me as well that comes through there that I need to answer for you. And finally, we're always looking for feedback on how we do, what we provide, what we don't provide from this type of presentation to you. You are also welcome to use this link to provide feedback to me on what I can do differently or you wish you had heard about or didn't hear about as well. So, questions?
Yes, this was scheduled for 2 hours. We do have another presentation. It's not over yet. This is just the first portion.
Yes. This is just my portion.
If there are any additional questions, you can come off mute and ask your questions now before we move on to the next steps portion. Okay, hearing none. Deb, if you'll stop sharing, I'll start sharing again. And we will move forward with the next part.
I don't think I am sharing.
I'm still seeing yours. But I think I can stop yours and start mine.
Okay. I think you're going to need to because mine doesn't show that I'm sharing at all. Okay.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about the next steps in the process and upcoming deliverables. TEA will present the Proclamation 2024 questions and answers document to the SBOE at the September meeting. The Q&A is used to provide official direction and clarification by the board. You're encouraged to watch the live stream of the board meeting. This item is on the board agenda for Wednesday, August the 31st, and it's item number 4. You may also be interested in watching item number 3, which is going to have some amendments to Proclamation 2024. So you want to mark your calendars for December 5th, 2022. That's the first publisher deadline for this proclamation. The statement of intent to bid is the publisher's official declaration of intent to submit materials for adoption. The statement of intent to bid must be submitted for each product and each course or grade level for which you intend to submit materials. It requires basic information such as the program title, the estimated TEKS percentage, the media format, and the system requirements. A publisher that does not submit a statement of intent to bid by the deadline is not eligible to participate in the process. You'll want to watch the statement of intent to bid training, which a link will be put into the chat, but also the deck will be shared. And we encourage you to submit a statement of intent to bid, even if you're still on the fence about participating. You'll have the option to withdraw at any point in the process, but you're not able to participate if you miss that statement of intent to bid deadline. So the next deadline we're going to talk about is going to be more about your standards alignment. We ask publishers to use a specific process to demonstrate where in their materials they align to the Teks. We have developed a web-based application called the Standards Alignment Dashboard, and you will use that to put in your standards alignment coverage. When you identify a single piece of content that covers a standard, that's called a citation. A complete collection of citations for a specific grade level or course is called correlations. You'll be granted access to the Standards Alignment Dashboard to begin working on your correlations after you submit the statement of intent to bid and after the breakouts are entered into the dashboard. We will be providing training on how to use the Standards Alignment Dashboard to enter your programs and your correlations. It can take several months to complete correlations, so it's crucial that you allocate sufficient time to complete that work. We ask that publishers submit preliminary correlations early in the process. This provides us an opportunity to review a small sample of your correlations and provide feedback for improvement. The preliminary correlations for technology applications is due on April the 10th. If you'll notice in the proclamation, there are several due dates that have different dates. So there's a preliminary correlations date earlier for courses that were adopted prior to April of 2022 or in April of 2022. And then the technology applications were adopted in June of 2022. So those have a little bit later deadline because you haven't had as much time with those adopted material, the Teks. Publishers will use the feedback provided from the preliminary correlations to complete the remaining correlations. These correlations are used by the State Review Panel as the primary resource for determining Teks coverage. And the final correlations should be carefully chosen and constructed and very clear. The final correlations are due on June 26th. And I do see that there's a question about do you need to submit the statement of intent to bid in order to access the dashboard? Yes, the statement of intent to bid is available now, and you'll find out how to do that in that training video. But you won't get access to the dashboard right away because we're still entering the standards into the dashboard. And we're also actually making some improvements to the dashboard. So it's going to be a little bit later in the fall until you have access to start entering your correlations. The next deadline we're going to talk about is complete descriptions. Complete descriptions provide more detail about the components that will be used to verify the Teks coverage. The complete descriptions must be submitted for each product in each course or grade level. Complete descriptions are required for each media format. It requires more detailed information about the submission, such as the program and component titles, ISBNs, preliminary price for each component, the number of print pages intended for student use, and the system requirements for all digital components. Sorry, missed a slide there. Pre-adoption sample is your fully developed product that will be used by reviewers to determine standards alignment coverage. The pre-adoption samples are due at the same time as the complete descriptions are due, which is May 30th of 2023. There are a few other requirements that I'll point out. Oh, I missed the slide again. Here we go. We have more about the pre-adoption samples. Pre-adoption samples must be complete electronic versions of the final product and must include all content, components, and features intended to be in the final product, not just the content identified for correlations. For example, all the student and teacher materials, diagnostic tools, test banks, etc. The pre-adoption samples will be posted to the TEA website for public review. The original pre-adoption samples must remain available and unchanged until the final post-adoption samples are submitted in March of 2024. If you intend to make any additional edits to the final versions, you must carefully track them in the standards alignment dashboard, and you cannot make those proposed edits into your pre-adoption sample. Remember, the pre-adoption sample has to remain unchanged through the entire time. Prior to the pre-adoption sample deadline, the fully developed product must go through a thorough editorial review. The certification of editorial review is due at the same time as the pre-adoption sample. And conducting this review prior to submitting the pre-adoption sample will minimize the changes needed to the product throughout the review process. The electronic samples must be free of sales and marketing materials, allow for multiple simultaneous user access, be equipped with a word search feature, and contain embedded correlations that direct users to the content cited for standards alignment. There are a few other requirements that I will point out on this slide. You'll find a full list of deliverables and other requirements on pages 18 to 27 of the proclamation. Publishers must provide information regarding their product's interoperability and ease of use for review by the state board and districts. The information from the publisher's report will be posted to the TEA website. And then for the affidavit of authorship or contribution, publishers must list everyone whose name is listed as an author or contributor and include in general terms the involvement of each author or contributor to the development of the material. Publishers cannot submit instructional materials that have been authored or contributed to by a current TEA employee. So here are the next steps. You want to review the Proclamation 2024 Publisher Handbook. It's coming soon, and I mean very soon. We're hoping to have it posted either by the end of this week or early next week. And then you're going to want to review the technology applications breakouts. We are anticipating, or we're going to attempt to post the breakouts for courses adopted in June 2022 by the end of September. We are currently working on the courses that were adopted in April or earlier, and we're hoping to get those posted by the end of August. But the technology applications, of course, were adopted in June, so we're going to try to have those by the end of September. You'll want to watch the statement of intent to bid training, and then you can go ahead and start submitting those statements of intent to bid because that is open and ready to be received. And if you haven't done so already, you want to sign up for the review and adoption listserv so that we can send out important information about Proclamation 2024 and then any other important information that we send through that listserv. Like we said throughout this process, if you get to the end and you've logged off for today and then think of a question later, you can always submit a help desk ticket with any questions. And we do really want your feedback. I have another survey I'd like you to complete. So it's the exit ticket link. just so that we can make this process better in the future. We really do appreciate any feedback you can provide us. So that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, you can come off mute, or Cassie, have you seen any others come through the chat?
None.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and go ahead and open it up to anyone that would like to come off mute and ask any questions about any upcoming deliverables or anything else that was talked about today. I hope we have answered all of your questions since we're not hearing any. We do thank you for your time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and give you a little bit of time back today because we were able to finish earlier than 2 hours.
And again, everybody, thank you for coming. Give me